Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to weirdly specific recommendations. So, as the title may suggest, I have asked on my Instagram stories for some weirdly specific book recommendations, and I am here to answer them. For the most part, I will be recommending books that I have read personally or books that are on my TBR, but for one or two, I had to do some Googling, so I can't necessarily vouch for them. And if you'd like me to do this again in the future, please don't forget to leave me some of your own weirdly specific recommendation requests in the comments below. So first up, I had a request for queer books with sport, and I have 3 recommendations for this one. I've tried to have multiple just in case you've read some of them, but I will try not to go too deep into any of them. So first up, we have Check Please by... what's the author's name? Ngozi Ukazu. So this is a male-male romance, and it is all about a previous figure skater becoming an ice hockey player at university, being part of the ice hockey team. So it is a very heavy sport focus with a male-male romance in it. Very cute, very sweet, a very wholesome kind of read. This is kind of sporty, slightly older Heartstopper vibes. So this one is more of a new adult contemporary rather than a young adult, but it is still really fun. Then we have Everything for You by Chloe Leese. I think I'm getting the title right. So this one is an adult contemporary romance with a male-male romance in it, and this has Gavin, who is an ex-English soccer star who has now come to America to play because he's too old to play in the English leagues. And then you have Oliver Bergman, who is on the team. He's been on the team since he was left school, basically. He left university to join the team, and the two of them are made co-captains, and Oliver's very excited because he has always idolised Gavin. Gavin is dreading it because he has a big crush on Oliver and he doesn't think that they should date, so he decides to be horrible to him, and it becomes an enemies to lovers kind of romance. Really fun if you like sport romances. I love them sometimes. This one was really, really fun. And it is a Bergman Brothers book, so you can read the whole series, but you can also read this one on its own. That is an adult romance for you. And then finally, Cheer Up, Love and Pom-Poms, which is another graphic novel. This one is a sapphic romance and also has a male to female transgender character. And it is about the trans girl joining the cheer team and about the other main character girl joining the cheer team and sort of what happens after they both join the cheer team. It's really sweet, quite short, and has a lot of important messaging around trans inclusion, and has a really sweet sapphic romance. The next request was for a middle grade that is not set in the UK or the US, or a YA not set in the UK or US. So I'm going to give you a few recommendations for each. So we're going to start with the middle grades, and my first recommendation is When Life Gives You Mangoes by Corinne Getton. This is set in the Caribbean, I think, and this one follows 12-year-old Clara, who has no memory of what happened at the previous summer and is then also experiencing kind of a weird relationship with her best friend Gaynor and doesn't know what's going on. And it's about her trying to navigate that, and as her memory kind of comes back in dribs and drabs. Hard-hitting, emotional, but also a very sweet middle grade book. Then we have Rooftoppers by Catherine Rondell, which is set in Victorian Paris. So in this one we have a young girl named Sophie who was found floating in a cello case after a ship crash and has now been being raised by a guardian. When she is being threatened to be taken away from her guardian, they run away together to Paris, and this is where she is convinced that her mother is secretly still alive and living. She encounters these street urchins who live on the roofs of buildings and hop between them, and so she kind of gets their help to try and search for her mother. Very good, very fun. It's such a Catherine Rundell book. She really is a modern classic kind of staple middle grade author, and I really recommend this one. It's one of my absolute favourites. And then my final middle grade recommendation is Shadow Forest by Matt Haig, also known as Samuel Blink in the Shadow Forest or in the Forbidden Forest. So it's got different titles in different places, I think. This is set in Norway, I believe. This one is about Samuel, who is in the car with his sister and his parents one day, and a log falls off of the lorry somewhere else and crushes as parents. So he and his sister are orphaned, and they are sent to Norway to live with their aunt and uncle. But when they get there, they find out that the uncle disappeared into the forest at the end of the garden one day and never returned. And so they are now just living with the aunt and her dog. And so it's about them dealing with their grief, and his sister has chosen to no longer speak now that her parents have died. And one day his sister disappears into the forest, and Samuel has to go in to save her and encounters many, many magical creatures. This was honestly one of the books I loved as a kid. I tried to recommend it as much as possible, and here's another opportunity. I absolutely love this one, and it is a really fun adventure, but it deals with grief as well in a manageable way for children. And yeah, I love this book. So my first YA recommendation is 1,000 Perfect Notes by C.G. Drews, which is a YA contemporary set in Australia. So this one is about Beck, who is living with an abusive mother. She used to be a pianist, but illness means she can no longer play, so now she forces Beck to play hours and hours every day, and is very abusive towards him, and he hates the piano. But then one day he meets this new girl named August, who gives him this new hope for life and hope for escaping his mother. Very, very emotionally charged, very difficult, but also very inherently Australian. There's lots of very Australian moments and references in it that I really enjoyed. So yeah, if you're looking for a YA contemporary not set in the UK or US, this is one to go for. Another recommendation is Enchanté by Gita Trelease, also known as something else in America, but if you search for Gita Trelease, the author, you will find it. I think it's called I don't know what it's called in America, but it's called something else. But Enchanté by Gita Trelease is set in Revolution era France, Paris specifically. And so it is about a young girl who has these magical powers that she kind of has to hide, but she uses them to turn tricks to keep her and her sister fed. And she has this brother who is kind of wasting all their money gambling. And so one day she decides to use her magic to sneak into the palace of Versailles and masquerade as one of the rich and wealthy to steal from them and to win money playing games. And it's kind of about that and how she interacts with the nobility and about the revolutionary sentiment happening in Paris at the time. I love it. It's a great YA fantasy. It's definitely like a low sort of urban historical fantasy, and it's a good time. And then another recommendation, I'm going to give you 3 because I gave 3 for middle grade, is Love Boat Taipei. And this one is about Eva, who is a Taiwanese American who gets sent back to Taipei, Taiwan, to attend this summer school that she thinks is going to be super strict, and her parents want her to go to learn the language and to reconnect with her culture. But what her cousins have all told her is that it's actually also kind of a big dating pool. So she's very excited to go, and it is a contemporary romance, but also has some kind of sad elements to it that looks at parents, parenting, and also the grass isn't always greener on the other side sort of messaging. So just some honourable mentions for YA that I don't want to spend more time talking about. Splinters of Scarlet, set in Denmark. K-Pop Confidential is set in South Korea. I Love You So Mochi is set in Japan. The Year After You is Switzerland, and then you have Love and Gelato in Italy, and I Darken, which is in kind of the Hungarian, Russian sort of zone of Europe. It's not the UK and US, I can't remember specifically what it is. I think it's the Ottoman Empire. So the next request was for a book where the setting or the place is also kind of a character. This was difficult for me. I find that difficult concept to understand as an autistic person, but I think I've got some recommendations for you. So first up, we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a gothic horror about Noemi, who gets a letter from her newly wed cousin saying that she needs rescuing from some kind of impending doom. So Noemi, who's living in 1950s Mexico, goes to this grand manor house that her newlywed cousin is living in to see what's going on and see if she can bring her home safely. And it's about her getting there and kind of discovering things are not quite as it seems and not really knowing what is wrong and how she can help save her cousin. In this one, the house is definitely another character, especially as you get into the second half of the book, and I can't really tell you more than that. Then of course there's always the first Caraval book, where the entire kind of island that Caraval is taking place on, it becomes a character. So if you don't know, Caraval is this festival sort of thing that happens every year in a different place, and if you are invited to attend Caraval, there will be some sort of game, and if you win the game, you will win some kind of impossible prize. So this year we have Scarlett and Donatella, who have been given invitations to Caraval and they have escaped their abusive father to attend. When they get there, they get separated, and Scarlett finds out that this year's game is to find Donatella, who has been kidnapped, and the prize is one wish from the game master, basically. And yeah, Caraval itself is or the island that Caraval takes place on is definitely a part of the character. It kind of changes and molds based on the moods and stuff like that. It's really cool. And my final recommendation is The Wicked Deep by Shea Earnshaw. This was not actually one I enjoyed, but I will recommend it because it felt more of like just not for me kind of a book. So this is a fantasy about many years ago. 3 sisters were sort of drowned in the sea in the island of Sparrow, and now every year, to get their revenge during this period of time, they will emerge and occupy the bodies of 3 weak-willed girls in the town and use them to draw 3 boys to their deaths. And the town of Sparrow definitely feels like a character to me in this book. It has a lot of mood, a lot of emotion attached to it. The next request was a tricky one and one I had to Google, but it was for a book where the characters meet online. Difficult. I was trying not to pick books where the characters had met online but actually knew each other in person. It's one of those like, oh, they don't know, it's that user 430 is actually Dave. I wanted a book where they genuinely met for the first time online, which was difficult to find, but the first book that I found that really seemed to fit the bill was The Right Swipe. This is an adult romance. It's by Alicia Rai, and in this one you have 2 dating app creators who actually meet on a dating app and ghost each other, and then when they find out that they are rival dating app creators, they kind of end up in this enemies to lovers romance, but they do initially meet on a dating app. The next request was fun, and that was for a sci-fi where everything is not as it seems. So the first one that came to mind that is immediate is Gideon the Ninth. I feel like the Gideon the Ninth series is the epitome of everything is not as it seems. So Gideon the Ninth follows Gideon and Harrowhawk. Gideon is essentially kind of like a slave or a future slave being raised on sort of the Ninth House planet, and she is planning on making her escape because she doesn't fancy a life of servitude. And then Harrow is sort of the necromancer in charge of like the head of the planet, head of the Ninth House. I can't remember what official term they use, but basically the Emperor needs new necromancers and every necromancer needs a swordsman, and so Harrow convinces Gideon to come as her swordsman to this competition to become the Emperor's necromancer. But everything is not as it seems. It is a really good read, really wacky, kind of hurts your brain, but it's fun. Another recommendation for me would be Show Us Who You Are by Elle McNichol. This is a middle grade sort of sci-fi-ish. In this, there is a company who is making holograms of the living and the dead, and it's kind of one of those things where you can go and meet a hologram and it'll be like meeting the person, like a celebrity. You could meet a celebrity and it would have like their personality kind of mapped into it, or you could also go and get yourself mapped before you die, and then your loved ones can interact with you still as a hologram after you've died. But not everything at the company is as it seems. There's also Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So Project Hail Mary is about a astronaut who wakes up on a rocket ship in space and has no idea why he's there, and all of his crewmates are dead. So he has to try and figure out what he's doing there, where they're going, why they're going there, and also why he's the only one alive. And he can't remember anything, and it's about him trying to do this while his memory slowly recovers, and not everything is as it seems. The next request was for a book with a non-binary main character, and specifically for a romance. So I do have a recommendation for that I have read, and that is Chef's Kiss by TJ Alexander, who is a non-binary author. So in this one we have a very highly strung chef who is working for a food magazine / recipe book company who has decided to make the shift into video content, and there's also a new kitchen manager who's been introduced. This is the non-binary character, and they kind of accidentally become a double act on the show, on like a YouTube show, that even though they hate each other, or the chef hates the kitchen manager, doesn't want to flirt with them even though they have a massive crush. But also when the kitchen manager comes out as non-binary, there is some pushback on whether that should be public, and it is partially about the reaction to the non-binary coming out. So it's not necessarily a positive romance with a non-binary character, but the romance itself was really lovely. So that is my recommendation for this one. I do have 2 that are on my TBR that I haven't read yet, and that is Pet by Akiko Maisie, and that is a middle grade sort of dystopian book with a non-binary main character, and then I Wish You All the Best by, I think it's Mason Denver, and that is a YA contemporary romance with a non-binary main character. The next one is really difficult and one I don't feel like I have a solid answer to, and that was for a book about the connection between autism and queerness. And honestly, this is not something that people are really talking about offline very much, so there aren't really any books about this. The only ones I could find that are kind of close to it is there's a book called Queerly Autistic, which is a non-fiction book, and it's aimed at teenagers, and it's about sort of queer sex ed aimed at autistic people, so there could be some kind of discussion about the link there, but I haven't read it. And then I did find online there is a short story collection called An Unkindness of Ghosts, which I believe is focused on queer autistic authors, and some of the short stories apparently do talk about the connection, but again, I can't vouch for it 100% because I haven't read it. This is a topic that I do think should be explored more, but it isn't really explored very much. I would imagine there's probably some discussion of it in some autistic people's biographies and autobiographies, but I haven't read any, so I don't know. I'm really sorry. That was as close as I could get to this one. The next one is one that I really loved and really got me thinking, and that was a book where you associate yourself with the main character. So there are 2 Chloe Lees books in this, I have no shame. The first one is With You Forever. This is Axel's romance, and I find Axel, the main character, very relatable. He is autistic, and his kind of need for isolation and fear of being around people and doing things wrong was very relatable, and his way of quiet loving, where he didn't really know very well how to verbalize his love and care for the love interest, but he did a lot of acts of love and acts of service, and that's very, very me. And that's also my favourite Chloe Lees, so would recommend reading it. And then If Only You, which is the most recent one in the Bergman series, which is about Ziggy, another autistic character, and what I really related to her journey was the way, because she was diagnosed autistic as a young adult, she kind of feels like she's babied a lot and treated as the baby, as the youngest sibling as well, and her trying to break out of that mold. And I definitely went through that stage when I was a young adult. I'm still kind of a young adult-ish, I'm 24, but I mean more when I was like 19, 20. I definitely had that same exploration. Again, amazing book. Another one is Convenience Store Woman, another autism rep one. Our main character in that is autistic, even though it's not stated explicitly in the book. Please stop just calling her quirky because she's Japanese. She is autistic. And yeah, what I related to her was being called quirky because she's autistic, and people thinking she's kind of quirky and weird, when really she's autistic, and it's a very autistic view of the world. But also this feeling that she has to live up to other people's expectations of what she should be doing, when in reality she just wants to do what she loves and doesn't want to live this big, fantastic, perfect life. She just wants to be happy working in her convenience store. I feel that. I really, really relate to that feeling. And I have one more, and that is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas, and you do have to read all the books leading up to read that one. But the portrayal of depression in this book with Nesta, I felt that. The next request was another kind of difficult one, but I do have a recommendation I've read, and the request was a book with a sport that is not played in our world, or sport or game, sorry, very crucial here, and I chose Warcross by Marie Lu, because this one is about the game Warcross. It is a game that has had this massive sensation around it. It is a virtual reality game, and it's kind of a big obsession, similar to Ready Player One, but not as intense. And basically in this book, Amika, the main character, is working as a bounty hunter for people who illegally bet on Warcross. and she is desperate for money, and she takes on a job where she has to hack into the big final of the game, and when she does that, she accidentally glitches herself into the game, which should be impossible. She's convinced she's going to get arrested, get in trouble, but the creator of the game actually invites her to take part in the next tournament because he wants a spy in the game to try and find out where some security vulnerabilities are. Really good. It is definitely a game we don't have in the real world, and a really, really good sci-fi read. In fact, this would also be a good one for the recommendations for a sci-fi where not everything is as it seems. The final one is another one I had to Google, and I only have one recommendation because it's a really difficult one. But this one was a request for a book where the male main character is told that they are short a lot. And there's a lot of romances where the woman is told that, and it's kind of a thing, but it's difficult to find short king romances. I've really struggled, so if you have recommendations for that, please leave them in the comments below. But I did find a manga, and it is called Lovely Com or Love Com or Lovely Complex, and it is about a male-female romance in which the guy is shorter than the girl, and the whole book is about the fact that the guy is shorter than the girl, and they kind of become this comic relief couple in their school. So those are all of the weirdly specific recommendation requests. Hopefully I met most of them. If you have any recommendations for any of these, make sure you put them down in the comments. But also, if you, again, would like me to make this video again and you have your own weirdly specific request, drop them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and if you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you were here, please leave me a sunflower emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!